Presentamos Conecta, un plan totalmente gratis con muchas ventajas por ser estudiante de arquitectura o arquitectura técnica.
¿Eres estudiante de arquitectura y estás en los últimos cursos? ¿Conoces Lánzate? Vamos a ayudarte. La plataforma de E.T.S más pensada para futuros arquitectos, con la que tendrás acceso a útiles herramientas de arquitectura como Arquicostes y Arquímedes, fichas de prevención y formaciones. Además, serás el primero en conocer los concursos organizados por E.T.S para dar visibilidad a tus trabajos y poder obtener interesantes premios. Accederás a más de 1000 proyectos diferentes de arquitectura. ¿Y sabes? E.T.S te regala la póliza joven sin prima fija. No esperes más. Lánzate con E.T.S. La plataforma creada por y para ti.
Aquí si quieres también había dos. Allí tienes a castellano. ¿Tienes alma que castellano allí? Sí, estoy mirando, está ahí. por si acaso. Si crees que te satura, bájale. Vale. Vale, ahora hablan ellos. Vale. Ahora hablará ella. Y ahora lo veo yo ahí. Sí, vale.
Las sillas que hay delante no se ha sentado nadie. Vamos a esperar un poquillo más para ver. Mira, las negras que hay delante no se ha sentado nadie. Hay dos filas vacías.
Sí, delante de la... Pero como ves, es que los tienen que haber ido llenando. Y queda otra.
Muy buenas tardes. Vamos a dar comienzo a este acto, que realmente es un acto emocionante y a buena prueba de ello es el auditorio que tenemos aquí hoy, esta gran asistencia, sobre todo la cantidad de estudiantado, ¿no?, que hoy nos acompaña y que en ocasiones pues tantas veces echamos en falta en otras actividades fuera de lo que son nuestra aula. En primer lugar, esta tarde, disculpar a nuestro rector Pedro Mercado, que se encuentra actualmente regresando de viaje de México. Sea ciencia cierta que todos los temas que se tocan vinculados al ámbito de la arquitectura le llegan de una manera profunda, porque en el fondo están tocando cuestiones que afectan además en la línea de lo que el invitado de hoy, Steven Holl, nos va a hablar, con la parte más experiencial, con la parte que tiene que ver con las emociones, con la parte que tiene que ver con el modo en que nos encontramos y con un enfoque filosófico, ¿no?, que a él pues le es propio, ¿no?, desde su formación de filosofía del derecho. Dicho eso, en el momento en que tuvimos oportunidad, el equipo de vicerrectores, de poder acudir a este acto, yo siempre que veo a la Escuela de Arquitectura en algún sitio intento levantar la mano, porque sé que aquí pasan cosas interesantes, muy interesantes, y que a mí, a mi trabajo, en todos los temas particularmente que tienen que ver con la innovación social, me tocan muy de lleno. Es muy complicado entender los espacios de innovación, la innovación social, sin entender los espacios arquitectónicos donde tienen lugar, sin entender aquellos lugares donde nos reunimos, donde nos encontramos. En ese sentido, quiero aprovechar para agradecer a la escuela la acogida que siempre nos ha dado para una gran cantidad de acciones que yo creo que han sido muy relevantes en la universidad, como fue en su momento en 2018 todo un proceso de innovación que se llevó a cabo entre estas paredes y en los patios, ¿no?, de esta fantástica escuela, y más recientemente un proyecto que nos conecta muy de lleno con todo lo que trabajáis, que tiene que ver con el desarrollo de agendas urbanas y que llevamos a cabo hace apenas año y medio. En ese sentido, pues agradecer a José María siempre y a su equipo todo ese cariño y esa apertura que siempre han tenido para con nosotros. Indicar también que la arquitectura desde ese punto de vista, desde mi punto de vista, tiene algo de frustración y algo de aspiracional, porque yo soy contable. Claro, vosotros hacéis magia, bueno, también se hace magia con la contabilidad, pero menos interesante que la que hacéis vosotros. Entonces, toda mi trayectoria he estado pensando en cómo generar espacios de encuentro, que en buena medida han sido espacios al calor de lo digital, en entornos que son más asequibles a la hora de diseñarlos que lo que pueda ser construir un espacio público o un espacio que sea privado pero que permita ese encuentro. Entonces, cuando me acerco a lo que trabajáis, a lo que trabaja arquitectos como Stephen Holl, pues hay una envidia y obviamente un deseo insatisfecho y una admiración pues que sin duda me gustaría dejar patente. En ese sentido, comentar y quizás un poco la única referencia que quería traer a esta introducción, que bueno, la semana que viene tengo que impartir una conferencia sobre innovación en Madrid, y estos días estaba releyendo un libro que yo creo que para muchos, para muchas probablemente es un libro referente, que es el Walden de Henry David Thoreau. Este libro, conforme venía hacia acá, reflexionaba que creo que tiene mucha conexión con lo que probablemente hoy hablemos, ¿no?, a través de las palabras de Stephen Holl, porque Thoreau básicamente entendía la vida como una sucesión de experiencias y de experimentaciones, y la principal experimentación que él llevó a cabo fue una arquitectónica, que era la de construirse su cabaña a las orillas del lago Walden y a partir de ahí repensar lo que era la universidad, lo que era la ciudad, lo que era su relación con el mundo, lo que era la arquitectura, tantísimas cosas que para verlas en perspectiva, bueno, pues tuvo que alejarse a un lugar donde se encontraba básicamente él y esos escasos medios, ¿no? El libro, si no lo habéis leído, es magnífico porque él relata incluso pues, los materiales, los tablones, los clavos que usaba para construir su casa. En ese sentido, creo que bueno, me gustaría finalizar, ¿no?, y quedarme con una sentencia, con una frase, ¿no?, de ese libro, que justamente es el título de la conferencia que la semana que viene voy a trabajar, y es que él se refiere a la universidad y de alguna manera lamenta que la universidad en su tiempo supone encerrar al estudiantado en torno a paredes en las que ocurren cosas que no se parecen a la vida real. Y entonces él se lamenta en una frase que prácticamente es literal, de que con nuestro estudiantado no tenemos o no hay que hacer que jueguen a la vida, sino vivirla de principio a fin. Y esa frase siempre ha sido muy inspiradora para mi trabajo y creo que es muy inspiradora para todos los que estamos en el mundo de la universidad. Y creo que, sin duda, la arquitectura es un medio excepcional para ello. Ahora que nos estamos replanteando otras formas de poder dar clase, de poder generar comunidad, de poder generar redes y conexiones entre nosotros en ese espacio que denominamos aula, en lo que estamos pensando fundamentalmente es que necesitamos aulas distintas, replantearnos los espacios, justamente lo que hacéis vosotros, lo que hacéis vosotras. Así que me siento honrado de estar aquí esta tarde. Muchísimas gracias y, bueno, pues tiene la palabra José María Manzano, director de la escuela.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todos. Querido vicerrector de Innovación Social, Empleabilidad y Emprendimiento, Esteban Frías, muchísimas gracias. A nuestro invitado, Stephen Holl, thank you very much. Y su director de Cultura y Estudiante, Alejandro Miranda. Bueno, buenas tardes a todos, queridos compañeros. Hoy es un día grande para nuestra escuela. Hoy es el día de la lección magistral, vinculada a nuestro patrón, que sabéis que es un patrón itinerante y que, bueno, hoy tenemos nuestro día grande con la conferencia de Stephen Holl. Quiero dar las gracias a todos los profesores, a compañeros que estáis aquí y sobre todo a los estudiantes que han querido acompañarnos y que no estamos todos, lógicamente, porque no cabemos todos en esta aula magna, por eso se retransmite también por streaming, pero que de alguna manera estamos todos ya vinculados a esta conferencia. Este es el final de un largo periplo. El organizar un evento como este no se improvisa en días, estos son meses de trabajo, donde, por supuesto, con la gran labor de Alejandro y por fin por la confianza que nos ha mostrado Steven viniendo a Granada, pues hemos conseguido pues tener casi un hito en la historia de nuestra escuela. Para mí, como director y también como profesor, me conocéis de una asignatura de segundo, análisis de formas arquitectónicas, los estudiantes que han estado conmigo pues saben que hablamos mucho de Stephen Holl en clase, pues es una gran emoción porque la impronta y la huella que Stephen Holl con sus acuarelas, ¿no? Tengo aquí el libro de las acuarelas desde expresión gráfica, pues sabéis que trabajamos en su pensamiento, ¿no? Con el libro de Cuestiones de Percepción, que hoy la conferencia va a versar sobre este tema, este pequeño y gran libro, ¿no? de pensamiento de la obra de Stephen Holl, y después su obra, ¿no? Su obra que todos ya la conocemos y somos grandes admiradores. Después de la conferencia, bueno, ahora seguidamente Alejandro Muñoz dará el laudatio y presentará a nuestro invitado, y después de la conferencia pues habrá un tiempo para hacer preguntas. Yo le llamo pregunta ahora o calla para siempre, es decir, es la oportunidad que tenemos para preguntar a Steven pues dudas, curiosidades, porque esta oportunidad es una oportunidad de oro y que tenemos que aprovecharla. Yo quiero agradecer para que esto se pueda producir, ¿no? Nosotros somos una universidad pública con unos presupuestos muy contenidos y se ha hecho un esfuerzo muy grande, y gracias al apoyo de las empresas privadas, ¿no? Empresas que creen en nuestra escuela y que nos apoyan, como tenemos la Hermandad Nacional de Arquitectos, que ya lleva tiempo colaborando con nosotros en nuestras conferencias, a SEMA, que está su presidente Fulgencio Avilés aquí con nosotros también, también con una larga trayectoria de colaboración con nuestra escuela, a Arquitectura y Empresa, con la que ya tenemos vínculos también de actuaciones, la empresa Strugal, la empresa Pladur, que ya tiene también con nosotros un largo recorrido con sus concursos de arquitectura que se organizan, la empresa Viroc, Klein, Flexbrick, Holcim, Victoria Group y Bowers & Wilkin. Gracias a este apoyo que hemos tenido de todas estas empresas, pues tenemos la posibilidad de tener entre nosotros a figuras, como en este caso de Stephen Holl. Así que desde mi humilde posición como director de esta escuela, agradecer a todos ellos pues ese apoyo y esa confianza que tienen con nosotros. Y esto también se produce porque hay gente detrás que está trabajando para que esto se pueda realizar. Y por eso quiero agradecer a las personas que se han prestado en su trabajo y que son fundamentales, que están en la sombra. No aparecen en los títulos, pero que gracias a ellos todo esto se puede producir. Y los quiero nombrar, porque yo creo que es de justicia. En primer lugar, al administrador de nuestra escuela, José María de la Era, a nuestro funcionario de dirección, a Miguel Heredia, a nuestro becario de dirección, que es un estudiante, Francisco Ortega, al personal de mantenimiento, a Juan Mora, al personal de consejería, que está siempre presto a que todo funcione magníficamente, a Agueda Mochón, a José Manuel Molina y a Emilia Heredia, que están aquí con nosotros, al personal de secretaría, que están hoy aquí también, ellos tienen horario de mañana y están aquí por la tarde colaborando con nosotros en la entrega y el control de todos los sistemas estos de traducción simultánea, a Laura Martín, a Ana Santaella y a Ana Tejero, nuestra becaria, otra estudiante de Relaciones Internacionales, que también nos está apoyando. A la biblioteca de nuestra escuela, que gracias a que Soledad Jacobe pues ha preparado una muestra bibliográfica de la producción de Stephen Holl y ha hecho unos separadores magníficos. A nuestros traductores que están allí en las cabinas, a Violeta Aranz y a Rafael Portland, que también están colaborando para que esto funcione, a la empresa de retransmisión, a la persona de José Antonio Barrio Nuevo y, lógicamente, a todos los que estamos aquí por hacer este día grande en nuestra escuela. Así que yo os voy a pedir un aplauso a todos, porque yo creo que merecen la pena. Muchas gracias. Y nada más, espero que disfrutéis. Después tendremos el momento para hacer preguntas y muchísimas gracias. Esteban.
Pues tiene la palabra ahora Alejandro Muñoz, subdirector de la escuela.
Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a este día tan especial que nos trae mucha felicidad a esta escuela. Realmente es difícil presentar a Stephen Holl, uno de los arquitectos de mayor impacto en las últimas décadas del mundo arquitectónico y al que muchos admiramos desde que éramos estudiantes. Stephen Holl nació en 1947 en Bremerton. Se graduó después en la Universidad de Washington y realizó estudios de arquitectura en Roma en los años 70. En el año 76 estudió en la Arquitectura Association en Londres también y fundó en el año 77 Stephen Holl Architects. Considero que Stephen Holl es el arquitecto más europeo de todos los arquitectos norteamericanos, por su acercamiento humanístico a la creación arquitectónica y está considerado como uno de los arquitectos más influyentes del panorama internacional. La trayectoria viva e incipiente de Holl desde hace décadas es comprometida a través de los valores contemporáneos de su arquitectura, que posee un espíritu de vanguardismo continuo y de equilibrio de resolver las necesidades sociales y del entorno. También Holl es reconocido por su capacidad de combinar el espacio y la luz con una gran sensibilidad contextual, tanto cultural como histórica, y de utilizar cualidades únicas de cada proyecto para crear un diseño basado en conceptos. Entre los premios más destacados de Stephen Holl está el premio Velux Daylight en 2016, el premio internacional Imperial en 2014, la medalla de oro de la IA, the American Institute of Architecture, en 2012, el premio Jenks del Riva del Royal Institute of British Architects en 2010 y el primer premio de las artes de los premios del conocimiento de la Fundación BBVA, en donde se premia los esfuerzos en investigación y creación a nivel internacional. Posiblemente en un futuro próximo obtendrá el premio Pritzker, al que ha estado varias veces nominado como favorito en los pronósticos, aunque para mí y para muchos arquitectos ya lo tiene desde hace tiempo. Siempre he defendido las tres patas deseables para un arquitecto, las cuales son la docencia, la investigación y el desarrollo profesional. En España esta práctica es más habitual que en otros países por cuestiones de formación heredada y por la legislación habilitante. Este país es un caldo de cultivo muy interesante donde han emergido brillantes arquitectos en las generaciones del siglo XX y XXI. En otros países, quizás debido a las leyes y atribuciones profesionales, este tridente de la docencia, la investigación y el desarrollo profesional no es tan habitual y posible. En Estados Unidos, los arquitectos suelen ser o docentes o investigadores o arquitectos en ejercicio de la profesión, a excepción de muy pocos que conciben el conjunto como un todo indivisible. En este grupo de arquitectos tenemos a Stephen Holl, el cual ha resistido al envite de las megacompañías americanas corporativas frente a un estudio de autor muy parecido al estudio español pequeño de tamaño, compaginando la docencia en the Graduate School of Architecture Planning and Preservation en Columbia University y también antes en la Universidad de Washington, en el Pratt Institute y en la Universidad de Pensilvania. Y por otro lado están sus investigaciones asociadas a proyectos recogidas en bellísimas publicaciones como Anchoring, Entrelazamientos, Parallax, Urbanism, Compression, donde se funden la investigación de los proyectos utópicos con los reales. Stephen Holl tiene proyectos emblemáticos, no construidos como construidos. En el primer grupo, en los no construidos, cabe destacar los sectores espiroidales, las barras de contención espacial, Parallax, el concurso para los cines de Venecia, su propuesta para el nuevo World Trade Center en Nueva York, o el puente de casas en Manhattan, donde se adelantaba muchos años a la intervención del paseo High Line, en donde fue un visionario sobre la revisión de esas zonas de oportunidad en la ciudad de Nueva York. El otro grupo, el de los proyectos construidos, han sido reafirmaciones de sus investigaciones teóricas, como la Galería de Arte Storefront, el Museo Kiasma de Arte Contemporáneo en Helsinki, la Capilla San Ignacio en Seattle, el Simon's Hall en Massachusetts Institute of Technology, el Museo Nelson Atkins en Kansas, el Rascacielos Horizontal en Shenzhen, el Lincoln Hybrid en Beijing, el Museo del Océano en Biarritz, la Escuela de Arte de Glasgow, en Escocia, el Edificio de Artes Visuales en Iowa o la Escuela en Glasgow, el Museo de Artes también en Houston, recientemente el Centro Kennedy para las Artes Escénicas en Washington o la Biblioteca en Queens. Todos proyectos maravillosos y muchos no citados aquí. De estas primeras investigaciones tenemos el libro Questions of Perception, del que se cumplen este año 30 años de su primera edición, que junto a Johanne Palasma y Alberto Pérez Gómez fue autor. Esta investigación pone en el centro de la cuestión a la fenomenología de la percepción de Merleau-Ponty, mediante la experiencia corporal de la persona en el espacio, definiendo 11 zonas fenomenológicas. Hoy explicará esas zonas en su primera conferencia en España y posteriormente estableceremos un debate quizá interesante y por eso os animamos a vuestra participación. Nuestro invitado, nuestro vínculo quizá con la Escuela de la Universidad de Columbia ya se remonta al año 2011, cuando Kenneth Frampton estuvo dando una conferencia aquí en Granada titulada Reconsiderando el regionalismo crítico, 5 arquitectos norteamericanos, en donde creía en una arquitectura de autor comprometida con los valores vernaculares del lugar. Realmente esta conferencia, como ha dicho mi querido director, no hubiera sido posible y, como se ha comentado antes, con los patrocinadores y sponsors, HNA, y repito, Asemas, Strugar, Pladur, Frexbrick, Biroc, Klein, Holcim, Victoria Ceramics y Bowes & Wilkins y Arquitectura y Empresa. A todos ellos les doy mi más sincero agradecimiento. Stephen Holl defiende aún el trabajo de lo artesanal, el dibujo a mano y las maquetas, en donde desde ahí se puede controlar y estudiar la luz, el espacio, las sombras, la materialidad. Así, una de las máximas de Holl es que los edificios tienen que emocionar y que la arquitectura deberá inspirar a nuestras vidas, por lo que espero que hoy disfrutemos mucho de esta lección. Querido Steve, muchas gracias por estar aquí hoy entre nosotros. Realmente es un gran honor y un sueño hecho realidad. Decirte que aquí tienes tu casa y que serás siempre bienvenido en nuestra escuela. Muchas gracias.
Could my students please stand up from Columbia University? Dimitra Zakaria gave this beautiful talk this morning. And I'm very happy that they could come and see the Alhambra. You know, many years ago, I felt that my beginning was in Rome at the Pantheon. The stories of living behind the Pantheon and see this space and this incredible light. But now I think I changed my preferred teaching. Building would be Alhambra because it brings together landscape, space, you know, all the different things that we need to pay attention to, and it's not an object. And I think it's one of the reasons we're here today. Alejandro agreed to allow us to bring our students, and Dimitri's been taking them everywhere. So what do we have? We have an echo here. So Alhambra is really something I visited 11 years ago when I first came to Granada, and I'm looking forward to my second visit tomorrow, right? This talk is one I've given before, and I really always believe that we have to have a theory, some way of thinking, a general set of principles on which to practice. So it's something I started many years ago with this book, Anchoring. And the idea of anchoring was every project is different. Every site and circumstance is different. In fact, Dimitri gave me this book, Meditation on Don Quixote, and Ortega y Gasset said, I am me and my circumstance. In a way, that's what anchoring was as a kind of theory, a way of starting. But I then, after years, a few years, I felt that's not enough, that's not a theory, because it's only specifics. What are the universal things that every architect should deal with? And that's when I wrote Questions of Perception. This is sort of 10 years after writing Anchoring. And Questions of Perception deals with all the different aspects that are universal, no matter what the site and the circumstance is. Can you go to the next slide, or can I run it? So this is a book that I'm not going to cover in detail at all. I'm just going to touch on there's 11 different sections in this book, but these are general things that we have to deal with, such as maybe this one moves it, no? Right, no wait. Okay, can watch it. Okay, one of these is enmeshed experience, the notion of the object in the field. When we think about an architecture, it's really embedded in the city. It's an enmeshed experience, like zebras that camouflage themselves with their stripes when they run. Or perspectival space. Every project that we deal with has something to do with the succession of space. When we talk about music, music is in a succession. It's something you experience in a succession in time. Architecture in a succession of space, of color. We'll get to that in a moment. Of light and shadow. One chapter deals with the spatiality of night, how architecture changed so much in the 20th century when we could illuminate at night. Of time, duration, and perception. And there, in that section, we talk about time as duration. Bergson, a great philosopher, Henri Bergson's idea of how we experience time. For me, water is a phenomenal lens. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest on a huge body of water. We still have a cabin there, Puget Sound. In the distance was Seattle, the Space Needle, the kind of futuristic images. But the water was reflecting the sunrise, the moonrise, the change in the tides. 2 times, the tides go up 2 times every day, 13 feet. So this became also something really important to me. And after all, 3/4 of the earth is water, 3/4 of our body is water. I still carry that in each project. Of sound, now we're doing a concert hall in Ostrava, which just was approved for construction. We'll get to that in a moment. Every project has, for me, what I call the haptic realm. That is the detail and the material and how they come together, very important. And proportion. We're always dealing with proportions. And I say this joint to that joint to that joint is 1 to 1.618. The golden section goes back into the history of architecture. All the great architects, in fact, the Farnsworth house is just a bunch of golden sections. There you can see analysis from Domus. So in this section, I want to introduce the idea of perception is something that changes as we get in time in science. We start to have new realizations. For example, can we turn that light off out there? So can they see
The
that?
peacock mantis shrimp. This strange-looking creature's ancestry can be traced back 400 million years. And it has one of the most versatile kinds of eyes in the whole of the
Imagine
animal
this
kingdom.
set of eyes on a human being.
It can rotate its two huge eyes independently of each other and in almost any direction. We have 3 kinds of color receptors, but the mantis shrimp has 12, each with a direct link to the brain, so it can perceive color faster than any other animal. And it can also detect the difference between polarized and unpolarized light. But unlike fiddler crabs, part of its body, like these paddle-shaped scales, reflect polarized light and may be used to signal to potential mates. The tail is also highly polarized and used to plug its burrow and send a message to warn off potential rivals.
Anyway, that's David Attenborough, the great scientist and commentator. And I think that science for me is something that we have to follow. I read the Science Times in the New York Times every Tuesday, read every bit of the Science Times. I buy the newspaper and throw the rest of it away because the news today is absolutely polluted. And I think by thinking about, when we have questions of perception, when you think about that animal, and something we haven't known that long, science has realized. So let's see. This is of color, the Chapel of St. Ignatius. I'm not going in detail. The concept drawing was 7 bottles of light in a stone box. The notion of different conditions of the program take different geometric forms, but each one has a kind of color dialogue, like the real Jesuit spiritual exercises where there's a retreat and there's a kind of dialogue between contrasting words and what's reflected. So the concept there was complementary colors. When you look at a blue rectangle and you turn your head and look at a white sheet of paper, you see a white rectangle. These complementary colors are part of our physiognomy, our psychology as well. And so in each of these bottles, they are opposite colors that are being reflected and then projected upon. There you see the blue and the yellow complementary colors in one of the lenses. And one of the interesting things is, even after 25 years, the place is completely in perfect shape. It's the heart of this Seattle University, and I'm very proud of the fact that they keep it in such perfect order, but they also understand the concept. They put on their website the processional area, the narthex, the color field is red, the lens is green. They understand, and if the student doesn't understand it, they can go to the website and see this complementary color concept. So I always say that, if you can convince the client they understand the concept, they won't destroy the architecture. And in the middle of this project, the accountants, who was talking about the accountants? The campus architect said, "Oh no, we have to reduce the cost. We're going to just do 4 bottles. We're going to take 2 or 3 out." And the campus ministry said, "Absolutely not. Stephen's concept has 7 bottles of light. There are 7 days. There shall be 7 bottles." Anyway, so I think a concept drives a design, but you need the client to come with you on the concept. And this was also a place where the idea of porosity, the idea of porosity on this street, it's in MIT, and there's a whole street that was going to be a brick wall. The master plan called for a bunch of brick dormitories. And I said, we were interviewed with some other architects, and I said, we can't really work with that master plan. If you let us redo the master plan, we could work on this. And I made another master plan that was all about porosity. They agreed, and then it's a long story, but this had porosity vertically. So this is a 350 person dormitory, and there are the student lounges, and there's a director attached to each lounge. And the idea of the porosity came also in the notion of how the building was made. So we actually took sponge prints and worked. When we were working on the models, we were working on different ideas of how you can get porosity. And then at one point, I wanted to identify the different houses with different colors. To give the building not on the facade, but because the structure is the facade, between the inner and the outer layer, there would be color to identify the different houses of the dormitory. And I met with the students. They said, no, we don't want to be identified from the outside. So I came back to my drawing board, and on the drawing board was a structural diagram from the engineer, Guy Nordenson, which showed the types of rebars. Where the building has larger openings, the rebars are larger and they're in more stress. They're embedded in this perf concrete. And I said, perfect. So when you look at the building, you can actually see the structural forces. The red is the larger rebars, the yellow is the smaller. So you can actually read the structural forces, and this is perfect for MIT. They love this relation to mathematics, structure, and perceiving that as part of the building. And the different dorm houses, the student lounges are all a different kind of porosity carved out of the building. It's a dormitory, so they made this film. The students made this film.
Oh, spongy sponge, our many windowed dorm, all those within, so welcoming and warm.
Anyway, it's still a very popular place. I can't compete with Alto's dormitory at MIT. That's more popular than ours. It always will be, right? The one building that Alto did on the East Coast. This is also a color. This is the Maggie's Cancer Care Center in the middle of London, a very difficult site, bedded in. There's a number of these cancer care centers that have been built under Charles Jenks, bless his soul, and his wife Maggie. I think there's several books now on them. And this one was based on the idea of a thing within a thing within a thing. There's a bamboo inner layer, which is the sort of place of comfort. There's the concrete structure, which is like a hand. And there's the neum notation, which is a relation to music. This building is right next to a cathedral that dates from the 11th century. And as Dimitra spoke this morning about neum notations, that's also a concept, a Greek concept about breathing life into the notation. So we put the notation in the actual staff of the window system, and that becomes the curtain wall, which from the inside it glows during the daytime, and then at night it glows on the outside. It's a very tiny building, but I'm very proud of it, and they love it, and it's a very comforting thing. This is a case where architecture really raises the spirit of people. You know, when you're having terminal cancer, you come there, you have camaraderie with fellows in the same boat, and it becomes a place of meeting. Families come there, And I think it's really an interesting building. Also because Charles Jenks wrote this book called The Language of Postmodernism, where he said architecture can't change your life. Architecture, you know, the whole idea of the modern movement is what's going to change your life. He says, no, no. And that's the whole postmodern movement, actually a little bit the deconstructive movement. So what happens in his trajectory is later on he decides that architecture can change your life because he initiates the Maggie Center, where he says that architecture has a way to lift the spirits. And so the first one was by Frank Gehry, there's one by Rem Koolhaas, there's one by Zaha Hadid. So he makes these places where architecture changes your life. So in a way, he goes against his theory written in 1975, The Language of Postmodernism, which was totally rejecting modern architecture. So I see this building as important because it's theoretically important in the history of architecture, that the whole, not just this building, but the whole Maggie Center idea that architecture is uplifting of spirit is a key thing. Water, a phenomenal lens. So I've used in many buildings, but I'm going to go back 30 years to the chapel, to the Cranbrook Institute of Science, which I'm very proud of, which opened in 1997. And it was based on a scientific concept of a strange attractor. That is, the idea, and this is a Edward Lawrence science concept, and you see that little diagram there on the upper left, where the original building by Eero and Eliel Saarinen is in red brick, and our new building is a kind of U that brackets onto that. And Edward Lawrence concept is a strange attractor is like when a fly moves through space, it never traces exactly the same path. And with that, we said we'll open up the dead-end galleries of the original building and make a loop. But water really was also a sub-concept, and water was the story of water. Water as a vapor, water as a liquid, and water as a solid. So you can see there as a vapor, the house of vapor, where a single drop of water is broken into 1,000 droplets. It's a very interesting device, and where there's misting devices that freeze in the wintertime in the house of ice. Now the climate is changing. That's not, the house of ice is not operating as many times in the year as it did in the beginning of this project, but it's a museum of science. So all the different aspects of climate change and things that are happening in our world are part of this museum's exhibits. Also, water is very important in the largest project I ever did, 3 million square feet in Chengdu, China. This is actually a point in my life where I had 75 people, and I decided I don't like a big office, and we had this discussion today about, so I said, after this project, I reduced the office to 33 people, never ever going to be bigger than that, so that become a limit. But the developer came with this idea of a podium and a condominium tower and an office tower. They had a formula, and I was very arrogant, and I just crossed it out, and I said, no, we want to make an integral urban form, create a space, and in the heart of that space would be 3 water gardens. And that was a kind of moment where this company, Capital Land, had so much work. The director, he flew to New York to look at my concept, and he said, okay, we'll do it. And after that, I didn't speak to him until it was under construction. So it's a strange moment in history during this overbuilding in China, which is not necessarily going on right now. The shape of the building, it's called slice porosity block. So we put their program of the hotel, the condominiums, and the offices in this courtyard, and the shape is determined by the sunlight. 2 hours of sunlight are required in the adjacent housing that existed. And we did the diagram of how you would build this basically simple rectangle, but these lines of the sun had to go through. And I looked at the planning diagram, and I said, let's just build that. We'll put the concrete structure in the 4 faces, and then wherever it's sliced, it'll be a glass wall. Anyway, that became the diagram that became the building. Here at the fountain of 366 days, which is marking the leap year of 2012, which this project opened. You can see the marking of the 366 days in granite blocks, the weeks marked in a glass block with light, and the carved granite, which intercepts the water, giving the maximum sound for the minimum amount of water flowed. And you see the reflection of the light pavilion by Lebbeus Woods in the water. So you have this combination of this almost like moonlight that creates enough light to give a kind of glow in the entire space. There also is the project of Lebbeus Woods in that, which was called the Light Pavilion. And that was, I had this notion that in the hotel, the condominiums, and the office, there would be a thing within a thing. It's such a big building. How do I break the scale down? So I put a small building carved out in 3 places. And this is the one that's the most successful. It's the Light Pavilion of Lebbeus Woods. And at this certain moment in the project, the accountants start to come in, you know. Now I don't have a client like I did at the campus ministry. I have to have a reason that this has to be there. And I said, this is the light fixture for the plaza, for the public plaza. You know, I know it's $3 million, but you can't take it out. It's the light fixture for the plaza. And there you see it reflected in the water garden. Anyway, we survived. Another project that just opened 2 years ago is the extension of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., probably the most difficult city on the planet to work in. London was hard. There were lots of meetings and lots of presentations, but this was somehow more difficult. Anyway, we succeeded. The Kennedys, it was a competition among, first there were 6, then there were 3, and then we prevailed. It's a living memorial. You know, unlike the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial, which are just really statues and plazas, this building has activities 360 days a year. So I was trying, and the real extension, the reason for the extension is practice rooms, rehearsal rooms. So there's a real pragmatic reason to do this addition. And I had this idea of glissando, this notion of music where, like the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue, da 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 da. So this notion could be shaping a form that had to do with what's underground, which is 3/4 of the building is underground in this case. And then you see a problem also is our original concept was to float one of the pavilions in the river and call it the River Pavilion. And the Army Corps of Engineers and many other reasons we couldn't do it. So at a certain moment, and actually this was the moment in the design, we had to pull the River Pavilion up on land, but then it functioned better. It can be serviced from below. And the project really creates a landscape. So that's the largest green roof in Washington, D.C. So there's functions underneath it that are connected to all these elements. And of course, the water gardens. I worked as a landscape architect for 3 years for Lawrence Halpern. So I love making these fountains. There's brass spout fountains there, and it becomes a really active public space. And of course, it's Washington, D.C. It's used all throughout the year. Even when it's snowing, they're using these landscape spaces. Detail, the haptic realm. What is the haptic realm? The idea of the materiality of something, the idea that it goes together. And maybe that's without actual, maybe it disappears. Like this is a collaboration I did with Gene Heistein. It was called the Snow Show, and we built the oblong void space in Rovaniemi out of blocks of sea ice. And it was constructed in a month, and it's really a wonderful space because of the way the light passes through these blocks of ice. But in March, it melted, and it disappeared. So, yeah, I think there's a kind of Zen feeling that I appreciate, and when I'm thinking about what is the haptic realm, it's something that doesn't really need the materiality. It's the interaction of material, light, construction, structure, all these things. This is a project that Dimitra and I made together, the Ex-of-In house, which we did as an experiment, was called Explorations of In. That is, that one of my professors, the great professor Herman Pont, said to me, when you go in a building, it's got to be more than when you look at it. And that's something I repeat to my students. They hear me say that over and over again. They haven't achieved that yet. They have some objects that they're working on now. And this is a little video that we did to talk about this project. So we started with Peter Sloterdijk's trilogy about spheres, his 3 volumes. We wanted to work with the ideas that he was working with. You're born in a sphere, the uterus. You come out into the sphere of your family. You inhabit it, the globe, and then there's a kind of idea of the foam of the universe and the political foam of reality. What we did was we made a bunch of drawings and made models where we had a trapezoidal volume and it was being intersected by spheres. And what we were interested in was the interior. And we called the project Explorations of In, Ex-of-In. And that's how this house got its name, because it came out of these models and these drawings. We worked on the design longer than it took to build it.
Yeah.
We began to work it from the inside out. And you will notice that this house has no bedrooms, 0 bedrooms, but it sleeps 5.
Every space is connected, one leads you to another, and as you come into this space, you realize that the whole thing opens up and turns around you as you walk around it.
That's the sunrise sphere intersecting, and that becomes the entranceway. This is the sphere overhead, which cuts the building in this direction. And this is the western sphere, which is a virtual sphere.
Water is life. This water pond literally brought life onto the site as we position it to the south. And not only does it activate and illuminate the interior with water reflecting through into the interior, but it also, with the water lilies that we brought into this pond, brought the frogs in and the turtles. And they are really a beautiful company to have in this surrounding.
We want it to be as ecological as possible. It has closed cell insulation. This is all natural wood, no finishes, no sort of toxic materials at all. Even the wooden windows are all solid mahogany cut and without any finish on them. That's a natural pine board floor, and it has a geothermal heating and cooling system, and that works perfectly. In the wintertime, it can be 0 degrees outside. It's 70 in here with the radiant floor. And in the summertime, we're using that same 51 degrees. That's 300 feet below the surface of the earth and cooling it. The water here is natural well water. We get 8 gallons per minute at 300 feet, and it's pure water. It's very pure, so there's no chlorine in it.
And even the facade is made out of a special stucco that's called Poraver. And that was an experimental application. This material is made out of 100% recycled glass. And it's very lightweight and porous. So the concept of the sphere that goes into all the different scales of the kind of human experience comes down to those tiny little 1 millimeter.
So no fossil fuels, geothermal heating and cooling, organic materials, preserve the natural landscape, 30 acres of preservation. I just saw a wild fox the other day running out of orange wild fox. There's a pond with frogs and turtles. They eat the mosquitoes. You can have water that comes off of your roof, collect all your rainwater, but if you make it ecological, that is turtles and frogs, you don't have any mosquitoes.
The most important thing is nature. Preserve what's here, and allow for the wildlife to exist around the house. So when you come and look out the windows, you see you're surrounded by animals and the sound of the frogs and the turtles passing. The way to make this abstract thinking of the sphere into a site-specific project is how to orient it so that the light comes in and works within the space in these different times of the day. The way this roof is sloping to the south made a perfect place for the solar panels to come on, and all these different adjustments that happened once you know this is a location. And the passive aspect in terms of the energy use, the way it's isolated and works with natural ventilation has also to do specifically with this location.
So this is the future, right? We're living in a time, in a place. Different places in the world have different conditions of right now. And we're lucky to be in the Hudson Valley. It gets cold, it snows, but that's part of the excitement. Big, nice snow, you know, outside. Moonlight reflecting on snow coming in through these round windows, gorgeous. Absolute silence, stars in the sky, and then autumn. This is all orange and yellow and red out here, like New England is. You know, I grew up in Seattle, and the trees just don't turn, you know, kind of a pale yellow. Here you get bright orange and red and yellow and some green mixed in. So it's like living in a painting in fall. We've entered a new phase in humanity where we actually understand the brain in ways we never understood it before. There was that old adage that Winston Churchill said, first we shape our buildings and then they shape us, right? Well, that was 1944. This now we know is somewhat true. So in a certain sense, we passed into a new phase of understanding the importance of architecture. Light, space, volume is very important to human existence, to psychology. There's a kind of winter sickness where there's not enough light in a space. But now we also understand that daylight and the way the seasonal light works on your body and your psyche through your brain is something that architecture can contribute to health. The first thing we did is we commissioned the great poet Robert Kelly to write a poem about this property. And he spent 2 months working on this poem, Phases of the Earth.
Where he says, so poetry and music make time pass, and architecture makes space pass into meaningful form. No, I mean architecture makes music stand still. That's more like it. Here, time turns into space. That's one of my favorite moments of that. What is time? What is space? How can poetry and art and architecture connect? How do they connect?
I apologize, that sounds a little bit like a commercial, but it is an Airbnb space. So if you come to Rhinebeck, you have to book it in advance. It's like 3 months. But I think it's something interesting because I put all the architecture books inside that space, and it's constantly rented by architecture students, some from China, you know, from all over the world. And it's a teaching tool. It's a kind of, and it's also preserving 30 acres as a natural landscape. We also have up there in Rhinebeck the Tea Space, which is an exhibition, ongoing exhibition, small gallery it's just natural light. There's no plumbing, there's no heating. It's just a little venue of natural light. And we have an ongoing exhibition series where we do 3 exhibitions per summer, only in the summer, because there's no heat and there's no electricity. I mean, there's just the natural light. So we have an architecture show, painting or sculpture, and we always have music, sometimes a special piece of music, and a poetry reading. We commission a poet, like in June, I think it's opening on June 5th. The Peter Halley is the painter, and the poet is Pierre Joris, who translated all of Paul Celan's poem. One of the greatest poets in history, in modern history, is Paul Celan. And it's really an exciting ongoing activity that we do, And it's kind of over and above working as an architect. So we have 3 jobs. We're trying to run an office, try to teach our students, but then also to run this program. And there's Ann Carson, I think, reading a poem. And next to this is our archive building, which I'm very proud of. That's also an experimental work. It's an extension of an existing 1940 bungalow house, and it's a brachiating form that saves every tree on the site, and that's part of the reason of its existence, but also to house the archive, all the models, and the library, and offer it to the public. There's a School of Architecture at Bard that only has, I think, 15 students. They sometimes come and use my library, which I've been collecting for 40 years. So this is also, but as an experiment, I was the engineer for the HVAC and the structure, so I wanted to make it just, it was built very, very economically, but then we did an experimental geothermal well 500 feet deep, and there's a new technique of a bundle that takes the temperature at 51 degrees as a closed loop, and it totally heats and cools this 3,000 square foot building. So that was an experiment. I think the engineers always want us to have 2 or 3 wells. You don't need 2 or 3 wells, 1 well, which makes the whole geothermal super economical. There's the library. There's the archive with all the models. And this is also a project with water. The Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. It was a competition. We won against Rem Koolhaas, Hod Williams and Billy Tsen, MAS, a number of architects. And we had the simple idea of the intertwining. The Institute for Advanced Studies is a place where Einstein did his final work. He died there in 1955. It's a very important, it's not Princeton University, it's in Princeton. It's a little ways away from Princeton University, but it's about the great scholars coming together, and they come from all over the world. That's what this facility is about. For them, a place to meet, a bar, a place to have lunch, a kind of living room. So our concept was the intertwining of nature, science, mathematics, all their programs, the intertwining and the intermeshing. And that's really what the project is about. And so you see water gardens on all sides of the building, and this notion of roofs that move up, and the director said, I know what those roofs are. They're for thought bubbles, the idea of thought bubbles above the scientists. Of course, I had to get special permission and approval from all the great precedents, Yeah, Le Corbusier came to visit Einstein there at the Institute for Advanced Studies, and I checked it with them. They said, okay, go ahead. And there you see the building. On the left is the building where Einstein did his final studies, and there's our building, our new building. So this notion of the vertigreen copper roof was trying to connect with that campus morphology, and we did all the details. That was not theory, and we made many different things like this.
This is for the IAS, the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. It's a space curve light fixture, and here's how we make them.
When we try to make details, we try to understand, who's going to make it, how they're going to make it, what is their operation. And this is a glass workshop in Brooklyn. So we make this, the concept of the building is space curves that intersect. So you can see a kind of miniature diagram of the idea of the building in these light fixtures. There you see the main cafeteria. We also did carpets, wool carpets that describe the ideas. And they use blackboards, right? here, these really advanced scientists, they didn't want to use benzene markers on whiteboards. They want real chalk and real blackboards. I thought, this is exciting. So I decided to make sort of half of the walls slate, giant slabs of slate that came, I don't know where they came from, but they're thick, so they can just draw on the walls. So that's something they use. You can see them. So that, you know, when you're working with some of the most advanced scientists and they're trying to go back to the analog method, like when we say as architects, we love to draw because the mind and the hand, you know, they are all connected in the drawing. I think it's carrying on some kind of a tradition. And the last project I want to show is a recent one, which we made at Franklin and Marshall University. It was the art school, the sculpture, painting, printmaking, and it was a brick rectangle. And they want to double the size of it, and it's right at the edge of campus. And you know, Franklin, it's based on Ben Franklin and Marshall. I was thinking of heavy and light. And
my name is Barbara Altman. I'm the president of Franklin and Marshall College. I'm in my 6th year here. And I had the privilege of arriving just as construction started on the Visual Arts Center here. The fact that we were building a piece of art for our art programs was one of the things that attracted me to Franklin and Marshall College, because it is such a bold, unusual, and gorgeous building that I thought any college that has the willingness to put this architectural jewel on its campus is a place where I want to be. This building removes constraints and opens to enlightenment, and I mean that literally and figuratively. This building is illuminating, and it's because of the way the light passes through it and into it. There is nothing constraining about this building. It opens our thinking and our creative process. So even just for me to walk in here for a 5-minute break to get out of my square wood-lined office and to see things quite differently with the lofty ceilings and the color and the light playing, whether it's snowing or raining or dark or light, it is freeing for me, and I think that's how a lot of our communities see it.
So the concept, I wanted to separate the heavy and the light, so the building is sitting on 2 concrete squares, and it rises above like a kite, like Ben Franklin's kite, where he discovered electricity by flying a kite in the rain and tying a key onto the cord. But that wasn't enough, and I realized that this is like an arboretum. They're gigantic trees, specimen trees, some of them like 3-4 feet in diameter. So I made this drawing. After the first concept sketch, I made this drawing that the trees, they would be preserved, but the building now is double the size of the original building. So as the building had to grow in size, it would inflect around the drip line of the trees. And the president was looking at that sketch and he said, brilliant idea, I love it. So I got to go ahead to develop it. It was a very radical idea, but when you go there, you understand the idea. You feel the relationship to these big trees and to the shape of the building, which is also built like a box kite. The trusses span the entire wall. Then also it's the lower part of the campus, so this is the water retention, stormwater retention for the whole campus. But the way it was built is like a box kite. So we could do these overhangs, we could do these shapes because the classrooms are divided along the lines of the truss lines. So in the end, it ends up being a very economical work, even though it's rather radical for that brick campus. And the spaces are loved by the students. They're occupying them all. It opened during COVID, so it was a very difficult time, but now it's fully utilized. And actually, I couldn't resist putting that. I was just there 2 months ago, and I saw some of the crazy students and weird things that they're doing, absolutely surreal. And they claim that the building helps them take, creative leaps. Anyway, that's a summary of the enmeshed experience of all those different sections of the questions of perception. But as you saw, the important thing is an idea that drives the design. So the perception is the general case, but the idea that drives the design is different in every circumstance. And I even found, connecting back to Spain, in this great philosopher's work, Meditation on Quixote, 2 quotes that relate to that. The notion of the concept as bound to perception of any act of vision brings Ortega y Gasset to the now famous interpretation of truth as discovery. And another thing he said is, the concept will be the real instrument or organ for the perception and apprehension of things. So this is like 70 years old, this book, or 80 years old, but still full of ideas that you can use today. And I think I'm really happy to be here, and I can't wait to be at Alhambra tomorrow. Thank you. You take questions. You're going to take questions.
Muchísimas gracias, Steven. ¿Se me oye ahora? Muchísimas gracias, Steven, por tu conferencia. Iniciamos esta fase de preguntas, ¿no? Pregunta ahora o calla para siempre. Bueno, yo voy a empezar para romper el hielo, ¿no? Y ya animaros a formular vuestras preguntas. Yo inevitablemente, como profesor de expresión gráfica, y mis estudiantes pues van a entender la pregunta, y supongo que se la habrán hecho en muchas ocasiones a Stephen Holl. ¿Por qué las acuarelas? ¿Por qué utilizas la acuarela como herramienta? El arquitecto trabajamos con lápices, plumas, pero tú eres especialmente diestro con las acuarelas, ¿no? ¿Por qué?
I started my practice in New York in 1977, 78, 79. In 1980, there was a very famous competition for Holl. And at that time, I was making just pencil, graphite, very large black and white drawings. But they would take hours and hours and hours. And this competition, the drawing, which I still have in my archive, took me 1 week. And I said, I have to change. And I went to a small 5x7 tablet that I could carry on an airplane. And I realized with a watercolor, I could indicate so many more things so much more quickly. I can indicate a wash of light coming into a space. I can draw a concept drawing that has some indication of the haptic, some indication, it was much more flexible. So I can also travel with a little watercolor kit that's only this big, and a tablet that's only that big. So since that time, I've done all my concept drawings on this 5x7. The other thing that happened was, when the iPhone came out in '97, I realized I could just snap the watercolor and send it to my Beijing office and my New York office, and everybody was on the same page with a small drawing that could have lots of information. So, yeah. And then Lars Miller started to publish the books. And yeah, it's a wonderful way of working. It's very, very economical and quick.
micro.
Hello, Mr. Holl. Thank you for this amazing conference. And I would like to ask you, like, as you were just like presenting your ideas and your way of thinking, I could not help it, but just I was always thinking about Alhambra through the process, because in the beginning you said like Alhambra was just like it changed my mind kind of, and I was thinking about the elements that you mentioned through Alhambra. As an example, the usage of water and colors in Alhambra
Right.
is a very, very unique way of using them. And the colors does not really like depend on some basic colors also. There are different tones, there are different tiles, and for water, when it comes to water, it's not only like pools, but at the same time, when you go up the stairs, you see that the water is used also for circulation. So it just like takes the water into a really different level. So I wanted to know your perspective on Alhambra and its usage of water and colors.
You know, like I said, I'm just realizing now that when I try to teach architecture, I want to give examples of great created space that they can experience. And the Pantheon was about light, and it was about the change of the seasons. But the Pantheon, okay, it's perfect proportions, and it's really connected to time, but it's an object in a certain sense. And when I think today we need to merge landscape architecture and architecture, you know, the students should merge it from the beginning. More and more we need to preserve the natural landscape. You know, when I was editor of Domus, I referred to E.O. Wilson and his idea of half Earth, that half the Earth should be preserved as natural landscape if we expect to save any rapidly going extinct species. It's a kind of urgent task. So I'm trying to, as a teacher, trying to change my examples, and I'm trying to find something that's as strong as the Pantheon, and I think Alhambra equals the Pantheon in terms of, let's say, an example that has these great proportions and great spaces. Anyway, I'm not finished thinking about it, and I'm going to go there tomorrow, and I'm going to actually do what you're saying. I'm going to look at the color. I never really I studied the water, I studied the gardens. I love the courtyards, but tomorrow I'm going to look at the color. Thank you.
And at the same time, like the usage of water in Sufism or in Islam
Yes.
is like, because as we all like recognize it as like the life, it has a really, really important place. So that's why like throughout the rooms also the usage of water is really important in Alhambra in order to give, I feel like, you know, like throughout the rooms, the feeling of just like being alive and just like hearing that sound and so on. So yeah.
You know,
Thank you.
It goes also to Asia. You know, when you think about the Zen gardens in Japan and their legacy that could be traced to China and ancient places in China. I think of, well, there's a number of ones that the use of water and amazing color is really central to the ancient architecture. So these are aspects that we should be learning from history.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much for the talk and the informations and the efforts. I have a question about personal style and the creative process behind some of your amazing projects. You know, as young artists, we want to build a recognizable, you know, fingerprint and pattern that is continuous throughout our projects. And I wanted to ask about this because I noticed that porosity and the usage of water and colors are themes that are, repeated throughout your project. So I wanted to ask what would be the key to, to us as young artists to build this recognizable pattern and fingerprint, in our style.
In my 1989 manifesto, I was actually arguing against this idea of a fingerprint, against this idea of a personal style, against this notion that you create a style that's moved from one site to the next, to the next, to the next. I mean, I really respect Richard Meyer, but at the time that I wrote Anchoring, you think about those white buildings that he did, the same building in Germany that he would do in New Jersey, it was the same language, and it worked. I think that's not the right way to think about architecture. I think that the site, the circumstance, the climate, the culture, all these things are unique, and therefore you should come with an empty head, not with a signature style. You should come innocent to try to make something creative. And I've been working too long. That's why you see these coincidences, so many projects over so many years. But I bet if I put them all out, there would be, things that are not repeated, things that I would never do in another place. I didn't show you the Knut Hamsun building in Hamarøy, Norway, which is all black wood with bamboo on the roof. I would never repeat that. That's not a style. That's a unique building for a unique circumstance, driven by a unique concept. But all these questions of perception, are bared upon in a work. But yeah, I would encourage you not to do exactly what you're trying to do, signature. I wouldn't do that.
Thank you.
That reminds me of a story. Rem Koolhaas and I are having a dinner in Manhattan, and I didn't have any work. I was a young architect starting out, just like he's speaking about starting out. I didn't have a style. I was trying to make each house unique, and my friends in Los Angeles had all this work. They were building little houses, and I said, Rem, I'm going to move to Los Angeles. I have 2 commissions for houses. They never materialized. And he said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. You'll just be one of them. So I stayed in New York.
Bueno, gracias por su conferencia, Mr. Holl. Tengo una duda, la pregunta es sobre esto. ¿No es una cierta contradicción entre cierta complejidad espacial y sostenibilidad?
I don't see why there should be. Look at the complexity of nature. Look at the complexity of a flower, or different gardens. Amazing. Like the garden we were in this morning of the great composer. I saw these gigantic trees. The movement of water. I think complexity. Let's take the example that I showed you, the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. Concept is, these spheres intersecting, where you get a space curve. I was trying to connect to Einstein's theory. So like a baseball jacket has these space curve lines on it. Now that was a concept. Then I wanted to bring in the water. But that building is 100% ecological. It's heated and cooled entirely with geothermal wells. It has natural ventilation. Water is recycled off the roof into the water gardens. So it's a complex architecture, yes, but it's also very ecological, 100%. So I don't see the contradiction.
Hola, de nuevo agradecer, por supuesto, lo que nos enseña y sobre todo destacar que eso creo que no se puede hacer sin un cariño especial por las cosas, ¿no? Y por las personas, ¿no? Y me gustaría preguntarle qué piensa, cómo va a afectar la inteligencia artificial a la forma de pensar, hacer y sobre todo sentir la arquitectura. Gracias.
I'm trying to remember, there was a recent article by a philosopher from Harvard. Anyway, he said AI can be in a way like a plagiarism machine, right? Taking things that are not creatively yours and pasting them together into some kind of amalgam that's not yours and multiplying it. You know, I'm a mixed feeling about it. I think that in the end, we have to see how this plays out. I know that there's some aspects of it that are really helping certain things, like medical predictions and organizational problems that can be suddenly snapped into an organizational clarity. I don't think that there's a way that we can resist it. It's happening. My students don't use it, thank God, right? Do you guys use AI? No, they don't use it. They do their creative work from their mind and their hand.
Buenas tardes, maestro. Muchas gracias. Cuánta belleza. Y qué hermosos todos los espacios que nos ha enseñado. Y qué libres, ¿no? Y también esos 11 axiomas o apuntes o reflexiones, todos ellos buscando la belleza, mostrando la belleza. Y inevitablemente, para nosotros, yo soy arquitecto también, para nosotros, en el origen todo está siempre un encargo, una función, una utilidad, un programa, que son cosas que han de jugar un papel en el proceso creativo. No sabemos si dominante o si uno lo toma como protagonista a veces, o si es un elemento más, o si es algo contra lo que luchar o defenderse. O tal. Entonces, a mí me haría muy feliz oírle reflexionar un poco sobre este tema de problema entre, o no, la relación entre la creación y la búsqueda de la belleza y la atención a un programa, a una función y unas necesidades. ¿Se ha entendido?
No, that's a central question to every architect. And Lucan was someone I respect. He didn't build that many buildings, but what he did realize are very, very beautiful, incredible places, like the Salk Institute in La Jolla. There's a place that you should go. My students should go to the Salk Institute in La Jolla. But Lucan said about a program is just so many bananas. I think it's important, but not that important. You cannot let the program drive a design. It's something higher, it's something more meaningful. And then I think we have a chance to make a beautiful work of architecture. But if we let the program drive it, I think it's going to be trouble. And I think Alhambra is an example. You know, what was the program? It's long gone, you know, many different things. Great architecture, by the way, rises above the problem of the program, because its greatness lies in the space, the nature, the reflection, the form, the perspective, all these dimensions, and we forget about the program, you know. So, of course, if you have a client, you have to answer to their program, right? Right now I'm working on a project, a competition in Tirana, where the president admitted that he didn't know what the program was. Ah, that's interesting. So we have to make architecture without really a precise program. I'm interested in that. It has to come from something else.
buenas tardes. Lo primero, agradecerle estar aquí con nosotros y brindarnos la oportunidad de conocer parte de tu obra, ¿no? De primera mano. Y es una pregunta muy sencilla. ¿Qué nos diría a los alumnos de esta escuela o incluso de todo el mundo, ¿no? De aquí, antes, cuando salgamos, cómo afrontar una carrera que para mí, sinceramente, es pasional, ¿no? ¿Cómo podemos afrontar esto en tan largo plazo?
I think passion, I'm born with it. I don't know. Maybe it's a little crazy. I mean, you have to be slightly crazy, you know. I mean, let's say one of the great architects was Don Quixote when he was, you know, attacking the windmills. That's what you have to do as a young architect. You enter a competition, you know, and you just say, I'm going to make the best possible project, you know, and you just throw yourself into it and you work really hard and stay up late and make people build models and you get all excited and you turn the competition in and nothing. So the main thing is to turn to something else and do it again. And it's a crazy field that way because I bet we do 25 competitions in order to win one. But I started my practice because we won. I mean, the reason I have more than 2 people is we won the Kiasma competition in Helsinki. 416 entries, and we won, and that was realized, and now it's 25 years old. And I'm very proud of that building because in a way it has to do with craziness and passion, working on these competitions. And I think in Europe there's real hope because there are a lot of competitions for public buildings. That's one of the things I love about the European condition of architecture. You know, look at this guy over here. He won a competition due to this magnificent street. I couldn't believe it. Last time I came here, you know, he didn't tell me. Oh, those are his light fixtures going down that. Fantastic. And all my students, when they got here, they said, Granada is beautiful, look. And they were taking pictures of his light fixtures. And how old were you when you won that competition? 31.
30 years.
30 years old. That's a very hopeful thing, you know. But it takes passion because you have to keep trying and failing, you know. Failing, yeah, that's just part of the game. I mean, it's not a game. It's part of working, you know, part of doing it. You know, the work that you do is valid, even if it's never built. The architecture stands, even if it's never built. And it's actually, I'm going to make a lecture. I'm thinking about that thought. As for students, I'm going to make, my next lecture is all my unbuilt projects. Yeah. That's what I should talk about. You know, because there's passion in the work, and that's how it gets there. And, you know, it's probably something you just are born with. I don't know if you can earn it. Or maybe you could catch it like a disease.
Hello. Here. Hello, and thank you so much for your presentation because I felt a lot of the affection you have for your projects and everything, and I think all of us have felt that. And I want to ask something because I find it's kind of strange and interesting that you have worked in a lot of places around the world, like United States, Helsinki, China, and taking into account all the things that you have said, like color, water, light, and everything. How do you feel like those points at each place? Like they are really different between all of them, like China, United States. How do you feel every of them?
They're always different. Like in every condition, they are different. For example, in my first huge project in China, the linked hybrid, where these towers, there's 8 towers, and they're linked by bridges. And the way we chose the color, you know, you saw what we did in MIT. In that building, yeah, there is a similar idea, and that is an exoskeletal structure. So not the inside, nor the outside, but the soffit, the head, jamb, and sill are colored using Buddhist temple colors. and we shook the I Ching to locate where the colors would be. A Chinese operation of chance to show where the colors are. And yeah, color is difficult, right? You can't just use it indiscriminately. It's not so easy. If you use it in reflection or you use it in the natural material, then you have a better chance. Painting something is not such a great use of color. I think it must come out of something like when it's an organic. I had a really wonderful moment with Alvaro Siza. I gave a lecture, a little bit like, not quite like this, in his university at Oporto 3 years ago. And they asked me to come and give the lecture, and I said, well, if I can, because I know Siza from many years ago, I said if he has a moment for me to visit him in his office. And so I went there, and we spent the whole afternoon. And by the way, he had Alhambra drawing on the wall. I said, Alvaro, why do you put, that was canceled. Why do you put that drawing? And he took a big drag off his cigarette and he said, masochist. But in the end of my talk, and this is the point of color, at the end of my talk, and I didn't even realize this, there were lots of color. There was the Maggie Center was there, the color, the Noom notation. I don't remember which buildings were in that lecture. He came up to me afterwards and he said, I'm impressed. Your use of color, like E.T.S. In my next project, I'm going to use color. But he never did, so. Okay. Last question, right? I'm getting jet lagged, so. Last question.
Hi, Mr. Holl. This is one of my first conferences ever, and it's really blown out my mind how I view architecture. As I am a first year architecture student, I've noticed how many people have told me to focus on different things to make great architecture. Some people told me to be precise with what I draw. Some people tell me to be to think big and do things no one would do. And I would like to know, if you were a first year architecture student, what would you focus on to be a great architect to be a great architect like you are right now? Thank you.
I wrote the first year program at Columbia University. I rewrote the program with Kenneth Frampton because it had so far gone off the track. Over the years, they had adopted the methods of Cornell. They adopted the 9-square problem of John Haydock. How do you start as a first-year student? Then we rewrote the semester in 3 projects that they would put together at the end of the term, and therefore they would have a big project, and it was 2 feet square, and the first was lines, the second was planes, and the third was volumes. So they had to make a linear composition where you move from one side of this site to the next, and they had to have an idea that organized the lines. And they made, all the models were wood, so they had to do craft work. So they're working with material already, with wood, and then the next section was planes. Then they would have to move across the site, and planes, and they were thinking of walls, of course, and water maybe, and the last was volumes. And I think to begin, just going back to the fundamental issues, right? The very, very, very fundamental issues of what makes a space, and then you have a way of working on a more complex problem, something much more complex. And I was very proud of that first year studio, and of course the postmodernists at the time, like Robert Stern and all the rest of them, were very upset that we had reorganized the first year into these 3 projects. And the classroom was filled with people. It was like a big problem, like, wow, what are they doing? They're trying to change the way we teach and all this. And the students loved it. And that's how I got to be a teacher at Columbia University, because I was with Kenneth Frampton trying to change back to the fundamentals. And I would say that's what we should do, is think about the fundamentals. You know, it's almost like geometric and material and light and space, just at the fundamental level. And I think that's, you know, that's very important as a beginning. But I think it's one more question.
Okay.
Last
Sorry.
question.
Firstly, thank you for the lesson. I read this book about the eyes of the skin and architecture and sense.
Johanni Palasma, great teacher, great teacher.
And because you wrote the prologue of the book, which has some phrases like, our deep own is stepping in eyes, because this background noise of the publicity and all the digitalized architecture, how Johanni Palasma invite us to reflect to this reflexive loneliness, and how it turns to this architecture of silence. So my question is, what has changed since then, because it's in the early 90s, and how do you feel about it? Because right now the students of my age, we are all born with a lot of information, and this background noise, I think it increased with the years. So that's my question, more or less.
I think it's a totally valid book to read today, you know. You know, the interesting thing about architecture is the long run, right? It goes on. I mean, if you do a great building will be hundreds of years. Look at Alhambra. I mean, look at the Salk Institute of Lucan. It's so powerful. That strip of water that connects to the Pacific Ocean horizon. It's mesmerizing. You know, the space, the simplicity. You know, so I teach with Johanni. We've done a lot of things together. In fact, he's the co-author of Questions of Perception, right? His text is in there. So these are all like fundamental issues, and they're valid for forever. I mean, one of the great books from 1933 is In Praise of Shadows by Tanazuki. And it's a very tiny paperback book, you can still buy it, and it's just about how shadows affect space in Japanese traditional architecture. And Peter Miller Books in Seattle, my hometown, sells this book all the time, you know. It's a little tiny paperback, but, you know, it was written in 1933. Of course, you know, I think these are you know, fundamental issues, and I think we can go back. There's another book that's timeless, Malta Gika, The Geometry of Art and Life. It talks about the golden section in trees, in nautilus shells, in the human body, and you know, but it's from the standpoint of nature, and I think that was written in 1914. There's Darcy Thompson's famous book about growth and form. That's also 80-year-old book. So don't denigrate Johanni Palasma's book because it's old. It's still valid. Everybody should read it. It's great. Thank you.